Yes, thank you for having us, and thank you for everyone here in the room or on Zoom. We really look forward to presenting some insights into forecasting the federal election, what kind of models we have there, but also how it is to forecast the federal election, to publish forecasts, and what kind of reactions you can get. So it will be a little bit about models, but also about insights into how our life was a few months ago. So exactly, we are Zweitstimme.org, or we are part of Zweitstimme.org, because we are more people. So we are funded by the German Research Foundation. And yeah, our project is based at different universities. So we have a team in Mannheim, a team in Witten, and then a team at Hertie School Berlin. So in Mannheim, it's me and also Thomas Geschwen, who you might know. And we were mostly in charge of collecting a lot of survey data. So we surveyed over 50,000 people. And additionally, I'm also interested in citizen forecasting in my dissertation. So that's kind of the space in Mannheim. Then in Berlin, we have Simon Munzert, Elias Koch, Milos Hagemann, and yeah, Waltraud or Mesker is also based in Berlin. And they are mostly interested in also data collection. So they were in charge of collecting data through social media ads, but also what do polls and forecasts actually do with people, their behavior, their voting behavior, vote expectations, and also what do different visualizations of forecasts and polls actually do with people. And then down here, you see all our research assistants. I saw some of them are online on Zoom. We had so much help during that time, so that should also really be appreciated. And then we have some people, some nerdy people.
Of course. So yeah, we're forecasting the 2025 elections, but one important thing for us was communicating these forecasts, also communicating them to the public. So we had this website, Zweitstimme.org, where we provided the different forecasts, Zweitstimme, Erststimme. And we were actually quite surprised, maybe not surprised, but I think we had more visitors than in the past years. So in total, the website had more than 1.5 million visitors mainly in the 2 weeks before the election. This increased to almost 200,000 visitors on Sunday. So there was really an immense interest this time in the website. Apart from that, there was also a big reception in the media and on social media here with climate activists advertising basically for our website and a comedian. And we mainly saw interest here in the district forecast, not so much in the Zweitstimme forecasts.
Yeah, exactly. So as Cornelius already said, we are called Zweitstimme.org, so that's about the vote shares, but actually in the media, the candidate votes were, or especially in social media, were way more perceived. And additionally to collecting data on citizens, we also collected answers from elites, local journalists, and candidates. I won't be talking about that too much, but we contacted them because we wanted to get data from them. And in return, we offered them so-called constituency briefings where they could get more information on their district. But because we could not contact everyone, but we also couldn't bias all the politicians or some of the politicians or give them more information, we had to put that on our website as well. So you could write us an email and then you could get all the information. That was our idea. But within the first 24 hours, we got 600 emails. Some of our student assistants responded to rather quickly, and then we decided to automate that. And in the end, we had over 60,000 people who asked for the briefings. And on the map, you can see it's actually more like Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, more the urban areas. We don't know why yet, but people were really interested in the district forecast we had. So now I already talked about Zweitstimme, Erststimme, but there are some internationals around here. So a quick intro to our voting system in Germany. So in Germany, you have 2 votes. Erststimme, the first vote, is for the person in your district. And it's really first past the post, winner takes it all. The person with the most vote gets at least wins the district this way. And then on the other hand, we have the Zweitstimme, where you vote for a party, and that's decisive for the distribution of seats. And all models here forecasting both.
So we'll be talking about our forecasts today, which are basically divided into everything that's based on the Zweitstimme model, so-called, and then Hannah will provide information about the citizen forecasts. The Zweitstimme model is a model that's already been implemented since 2017. There's some new challenges now with a new party that emerged, but in general, it's a dynamic model that's based on polls and fundamental data. And on top of that Zweitstimme model, there's also built an Erststimme model to provide forecasts for the constituencies.
Exactly, and then the second model I'll be talking about today is the citizen forecast, which is based on survey data. So starting 30 days before the election, we surveyed over 50,000 individuals through online access panel and social media ads. And we asked for expectations of the election outcome. And that's also covered in Zweitstimme, the Erststimme, and some more things I'll talk about later. And the idea is to ask for the individual expectations, and then you aggregate them to one forecast. The wisdom of the crowd does its magic and get a nice.
Okay, so let's first talk about the Zweitstimme forecast, the party vote forecast. Well, I'll briefly talk about the Zweitstimme model in more detail. So mainly, the model has a fundamentals component, where we measure things like results from the previous election, and then also voting several months before the election, polling, so voting intentions, but also an indicator for the chancellor's party to capture effects here. But then there's also the dynamic component, where we have public opinion polls. And there's a continuous data collection. That's also something that we provide on the website, basically daily updates of the forecast. So the model is dependent on available polling data. One challenge, but also something that the model could incorporate is new parties. And as I said before, the model has already been used successfully at previous elections. So the polls, as you can see, there's some movement. These are the polls in the months before the election. Particularly here, we see the left party gaining momentum at the end. And this is something that when we look at the forecasts of the Zweitstimme model is something that we also capture in the model and then publish regularly. Evaluating the Zweitstimme model was very good performance. Again, actually, if you look at the confidence intervals or the credible intervals, they're 83%. So we would expect that in about 1 out of 6 cases, actually the results are outside of these intervals. So the results are here, the bars in the back row. And what we see is that none of them fall outside. So we actually, in this case, are more precise than we would have expected.
Yeah, so that was the one model to forecast the Zweitstimme. And I want to talk a little bit about citizen forecasting. So I said the core idea is really you ask individuals. For example, I could ask all of you, imagine I have a jar with jelly beans or gummy bears. I give it to you, and each of you gives me an estimate how many gummy bears are in there. Maybe none of you is right, but if I take the mean, that could be very accurate. At least that's what former research shows. And that's kind of the idea I'm using here. So it was previously applied, for example, in the US, there was asked how many gummy bears are in the jar, but who will become the next president. But it has also been applied in Germany for metric outcomes like vote shares. And we had a survey in the field with an online survey with over 50,000 Germans that we interviewed, and it was partially an online access panel, but also social media ads. Maybe your Instagram also showed you a nice whale. Maybe for those who don't speak German. Wahl, which is election, and Wahl, which is whale, sound very similar. So there's our small pun, which became kind of our brand. And that's how we collected a lot of data, and what was also important to us because we not only want to forecast the national vote share, but also go on the constituency level. So we had between 90 and 400 respondents in each district. and maybe just talking a little bit about what make our life difficult, or especially my life difficult. So if you want to find out in which district people live, you could ask them, do people actually know where they live? We don't think so. Next step, zip code. You know your zip code, right? But the zip code sometimes can cover 1, 2, or 3 electoral districts. So what do you do there? You would think, there's a nice match, like the federal returning officer. No way. And zip codes are not a public good. You have to pay for them to get them. So I did a lot of matching with the zip codes and everything, but I was not alone. Maybe you had something similar on Site Online. They had to do kind of the same job. And we figured out that we had like an overlap of 95%. So our data was quite precise, but it was actually hard to get a match between the zip code and the district. Anyhow, what did we ask for besides the zip code? We asked for the Zweitstimme shares for each party. So really, what do you think will be the vote shares for each party? Then we asked, in your district, who do you think will win? Because winning is the most important. But then we also asked, what is your expectation on the shares for the various parties? Then, because we have a 5% threshold, and or parties need to get at least 5% of the vote shares, or 3 districts they need to win. So we asked for the likelihood of certain parties to enter parliament, and then also what the respondents expect the coalitions and the chancellor will be. And then it's actually rather straightforward. For the vote shares, you just take the mean, and for the others, you go for the vote. So let's illustrate it for the Zweitstimme expectations. Here you can see the question. There's an online survey with sliders. Question read in German: what percentage of votes do you expect the various parties to receive nationwide? And then the people could just select. And here you see the distribution. So that's all the individual expectations. And then I just took the mean. So the mean is the orange line, and then you see the black line is the result. And you can see for some parts it looks actually quite good. If you look at the Social Democrats in red, for other parties it was worse. But if we combine it in a different illustration, here you see the dots, that's the point estimates, and then the bars are the results from the election. It's actually quite good. So the mean absolute error was an average absolute deviation of 1 percentage point. What you can also see here, which was for something that was very important in the Zweitstimme model, was communicating uncertainty. That's not done here. Here it's just the mean, and you can see it did work quite well. But if you look at the dashed line, the 5% threshold didn't work that well. But yeah, the mean absolute error doesn't really punish it. And you can also see that the left party, purple, Die Linke, they were really on the rise during the last weeks, but we collected data starting 30 days before the election, so we didn't grasp that well. And maybe another thing, I like this plot a lot. I told you the mean absolute error was 0.03 for the group forecast. So there was one group, or there was the big group, the mean, and that had an mean absolute error of 1. And I took data from over 50,000 people. And those lines you can see is the distribution of mean absolute errors for the individuals. So only 0.5% of the individuals performed better than the group. If that is not a miracle of aggregation, I don't know. So let's move to the Erststimme.
So the basic idea for the Erststimme model is that it's based on the national trend, so the national forecasts. And then we need to break down this national trend to the districts. In this model, we're using a proportional swing approach. So it's something that if we see on the national level that a party doubles its vote share, then this is something that we would also expect in the district. Although they could be coming from different levels. This was also first implemented in 2017, and then again 2021 and last election 2025. Here again, the challenge this time was the new party. In this case, because the model is based on certain factors, party-specific factors like the vote share at the past election. This was somewhat of a challenge where we had to make assumptions how this vote share could be divided into these parties, because the new party is actually could also be seen as kind of a split of one old party. Yeah, and then we basically break down the national trend to the districts. So we have an estimate for how the vote shares in the district will be, and we put these into a model together with other factors, like the number of candidates in a district. That's something that would usually lower the vote share, of course, of individual candidates. Also an incumbent candidate indicator on the district level, which indicates whether in this district the incumbent is running or not. So if you're not the incumbent and there's no incumbent running, that would give you, for example, a boost in your district, in your vote share. And then we have a number of candidate level factors. Things like also incumbency status here for the for person specific. This of course means that you would on average get a bonus. We also have things like the academic title, which of course also gives you a bonus. It's smaller. And these are the results. So I think, one of the main, we're going to look at different maps in a second. This is a bit difficult to see trends here, but the main outcome here is that with the Erststimme model, which is based on the Zweitstimme model, we get about 200, we get exactly 270 constituencies right for the 2025 election out of 299. And the citizen forecast is actually even a little bit better, getting 4 more right.
Yes, jumping in here to the citizen forecast. So how is that built? We asked people, who do you think will win in your district? And then we took the candidate who was mentioned most of in the districts. And then you can see, for example, there is a white spot in the middle. Actually, CDU and SPD were, the vote was split between both of them. So there we actually couldn't make a forecast. But I think it's quite hard to grasp. So we prepared another map for you. So let's do some nice clicking. So that's the Erststimme model. Where you can
let's switch around a bit because this kind of shows this is the actual winners and this is what we predicted. So we can see that's this, mainly we got these districts here, they all went to the SPD and we had them for the CDU. There's also some districts here that actually went to the CDU where we thought they were going to go to the SPD. And one thing in general, these are mostly very contested districts, so they are very difficult to forecast.
Just a quick question. When you say the candidate that's going to win in the district, can a party have more than 2 candidates in the district, or is one candidate per one candidate per house? Because in Ireland there can be more than one, so
that's good to know. No, it's really fantastic.
Also, a quick question. Since you said, Cornelius, that these were very highly contested districts, does that mean then that in those where you misclassified the winner, your MAE in terms of vote shares wasn't worse than in the others? So was the model fairly constant in terms of predictability in those that you got right?
Something that we didn't evaluate. I'm not sure. Generally, the MAE was about 2.2 percentage points. I think pretty good. I do know that we had the highest errors in districts with, I think they were also contested, things like Erfort or the Berlin districts, where in the end there was a strong popularity bonus for some candidates. I think. So my guess would be that the model performed less good in contested districts.
Yeah, but one thing that we still want to do, our project is still running for a few more years, so we still have some work to do. It's also to look at the margin of victory and how that varies. But for example, here there is Erfort, and there you can see he actually won by quite a margin. So he received 37%. The runner-up, the AFD, only got 27%. But they're actually the Erststimme forecast of the AFD, but the citizens who knew who was running and that Colorado was running, they thought that the left party would win. Just to show a little bit of this here. And then there was also Schwalm-Eder, which I mentioned. So that was actually a really close race, where CDU got one with 30%, the SPD was second with 28%. And yeah, the citizens actually couldn't forecast who would win. And the Erststimme was wrong in that case. So it's a really like you're kind of 299 races where you need some local knowledge and the model cannot incorporate that, then the citizens maybe can incorporate that, but maybe they also look at the national trends. So yeah, but overall we were quite good.
Yeah, here we also had a candidate that was incredibly popular. We forecast 25% and got more than 40%, but this is something that the model just doesn't capture. And this was actually, I think, also a trend of this election that popular candidates, or at least from the left party, really attracted a lot of votes. So.
No. Or do you have a favorite district you want to see how we perform there? And know where it's paid on the map. Yeah, I mean, we will look into Mannheim in a second.
Okay, so evaluating the Erststimme forecasts, I already said we had 270, Anna had 274 correct. Our performance was much better than at the previous election. At the previous election, the problem was that the AfD won a lot of districts for the first time. That's something that's a bit difficult to forecast. Generally, urban districts are more difficult. They're also more contested often. We talked about local candidate effects and challenges in predicting left party strongholds. Here is kind of a benchmark that we're showing. So we're showing, here is our Erststimme model, showing the 270 correct districts. Here's a citizen forecast model. And then we actually see that election.de got even more right. YouGov is also a big model, and Wahlkreisprognose. In any case, the forecast performed much better than just guessing whoever won in the past election. So that's already good. That kind of shows us that there's some value in the forecasts. And maybe one note on election.de is and Wahlkreisprognose. They're not transparent completely about how they produce their results, which is something that's really important to us. And YouGov actually, these are results from an MRP model. So this is something where they also collected a lot of local data. And that's maybe interesting to see that that doesn't help that much.
Exactly. So 299 district races. We're going to look into one district in more detail, and one could it be, of course, we chose Mannheim for today. And here you can see the left part was published on our website, so you could go there, enter your zip code, find your district, and then you get the forecast. And then the right part, the citizen forecast, we didn't publish district level in advance, but we will publish them like some kind of publication. But let's turn to the Erststimme one first.
Yeah, so should I explain that?
Maybe what the lines mean, why we don't have dots there.
Yeah, this is something that we actually discussed within the project, that we have lines, and even here we changed this. We don't have point estimates. We also say, for example, CDU has 18 to 31%, really to communicate that the model has quite some uncertainty, and how do we display that this district is actually very contested, is by using these bars that indicate that we're not very certain where the results will be, but that we do think that it's somewhat probable that the CDU will win. Something that I'll be talking about also in a bit is, we actually estimated that in Mannheim there will be a vacant mandate, and that's something that I'll explain in a second.
Yeah, exactly. So Mannheim was also interesting because the CDU candidate used to be a green candidate. That's also something the model cannot really incorporate, but the citizens might have known. But you can see here, or put differently, we asked two different questions. We asked who will win your district, use the mode, CDU will win. But then, similar for the Zweitstimme, we also asked what do you think which vote or how much of the votes will the various parties receive. And then that was also aggregated, and then here you can see the dots for the forecast. The mean absolute error was, I think, 1.9, so a little bit worse, but still quite good, I think. And now you might be wondering, what's this dot there, and why isn't there a colored background? Because the background is actually the real result, but there was no BSW candidate in Mannheim. So why do we have a forecast? Well, when you implement a survey for 299 districts, you need to think about, do I want to add the candidates' names or, just like placeholders? And when we went into the field, because it was an early election, 30 days before the election, we actually did not know who will compete in the district. So it would have needed a change within like data collection. Let's put it this way, we were quite busy during those times. So right now, this is what the forecasts look like, and we need to think about how we can, look at those districts where we have forecasts for candidates that don't exist. Maybe we can normalize it kind of and move those vouchers to the other parties. But you can see that the underestimated CDU was overestimated, but for example, AFD and SPD were, this is quite new what the result would be. I mean, they also shaped the result later on, but so those are the insights into Mannheim. And then Cornelius mentioned something about vacant districts, which is something really,
that we also forecast. Vacant district, for those who didn't follow that, for the first time in German election history, winning a district doesn't guarantee a seat. You can see here there's these white spots in the map. These are districts where someone won the district, but they didn't win a seat. So the idea is kind of to limit the size of parliament, and to do that, the new rule is that your Erststimme seats, the district seats, must be covered by basically seats allocated by the Zweitstimme votes. I'll explain a bit how the procedure is in election law, how that's determined, which seats will be empty, and then I'll kind of say how we imitate that in our model. So here, the basic idea is that this happens at the state level. So first we need to see, we need to rank the candidates within parties by the vote share that they achieved for the district vote. We need to find out how many seats this party would receive in that state. And then let's say they won 13 districts, but they would only get 10 seats in that state. Then the 3 lowest ranking candidates from that party, they would, even though they won their district, they wouldn't enter parliament. And of course, this is also something that's more likely to happen in competitive districts, because that's where their vote share would be low. We can also talk about that later. So to produce the forecasts, to get an idea of which districts will probably be vacant, what we do is, again, we look to the Zweitstimme model, which allows us to draw from distributions and basically create 10,000 different scenarios, 10,000 simulations. And for each of these simulations, we calculate, according to the electoral law, what would be the result in seats that would be empty. So in one step, we need to calculate the predictions for the Erststimme, which is something that the Erststimme model also does. Then we also need to determine which parties would actually enter parliament. So we need to see, we need to only include parties that achieve more than 5% in the Zweitstimme, or that win more than 3 districts. So this is something that can vary, and that also in this election is something that was not unlikely that this would happen for the left party. It gets a bit complicated. We need to then divide the seats that a party receives at the national level to the states. And then we have the ranked candidates from the Erststimme But yeah, the baseline is that for each of the simulations, we now know who would not enter parliament. And then we just calculate the probability based on the number of simulations for a district. Yeah. So it's a bit complicated. Generally, it's something we're already said in more competitive districts. It's more likely that your mandate, that you will win the district, but not the mandate. So most vacant districts, we expected that for the CDUC. So this is mainly because in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, what happens is they tend to win almost all of the districts in these states, but they don't win enough Zweitstimme votes to cover these seats. We also saw that for the AfD in Eastern Germany, as they also now tend to win almost all districts in these states, but especially in states like Brandenburg, they don't get enough Zweitstimme votes. But we also projected this sometimes for the left party, for example, in the city states. So Berlin, there was, and I think they even won 2 or 3 districts, but there were scenarios where they were going to win 4 or 5 districts, and that's just not covered. Yeah, that was very unlikely that that would be covered by the Zweitstimme votes. And this is how this looks like. On the left, you can see our forecasted probabilities. So the darker a district is, the more likely we said this was going to be a vacant district. And here's again the map with the white districts that are actually vacant. So what we would want is that the darker the districts, the darker districts on this side actually remain white on this map. And it's something where we can see it's somewhat challenging to forecast because it also depends on a lot of factors. But we do see that especially like the really dark ones, like here, that's I think Flensburg. Remains vacant. We also see, I think, Mannheim is vacant. Erfort is vacant. This one, Göttingen is not vacant. So,
but for example, Schwalm-Eder, which I mentioned before, where the citizens were tied, and our forecast also didn't really match. That was also indicated that it's rather competitive, and in the end, you can see the white dot in the middle. So actually, that district remained vacant. Some nice insights.
Yeah. So for the Zweitstimme model, like I said, for the vacant districts, these draws from the distributions allows to look into scenarios and simulate different cases, so that in a similar sense, that also allows us to have probabilities for different events. So in this case, these are probabilities for entry into parliament, where we predicted, for example, for the PSV, only a 24% chance, FDP only 14% chance of entering parliament, where we technically correctly predicted them to miss the 5% thresholds. But yeah, they were actually very close to the threshold. So it's a very difficult forecast.
Yeah, exactly. So that was derived from the Zweitstimme model, but we also explicitly asked the citizens, what do you think, how likely is it that those parties will enter parliament? And in the end, we were actually quite interested in the left party, Die Linke, PSW, the New Party, and the Liberals, the FDP. But we also entered other parties because we were wondering, like, okay, with the Greens, it's probably quite sure that they will enter parliament, but are there citizens who think that this won't be the case, and then the other way around for Freie Wähler? And here you can see the distributions of how many of the respondents answered what. But the idea of the citizen forecast would really be take the vote, and that's the final answer, kind of. So for the Greens, you can see the answer would definitely be green, very likely or likely in parliament, which was actually right. For the left party, it also moved into the green area over time. In the beginning, it was not like that, but the closer we got to election day, that was also the case. And for BSW, it's kind of 50-50, which really makes sense because you mentioned it's a 5% threshold, and they got 4.97. So it was really only a few thousand votes. So that, yeah, 51% said it's likely they make it to parliament, but yeah, it's really a close call. But then for the FDP, who did not make it into parliament, you can see that there's a red majority, so it's likely or unlikely or very unlikely that they enter parliament. And then for Freie Wähler, the pattern once again more clear, displaying that citizens actually, like the majority of citizens, kind of knows what will happen.
One thing that we also forecast is majorities and coalitions, although here we actually forecast different things in this scenario. So our model yet is not able to forecast coalitions. So all that we're forecasting here is the probabilities for different majorities. So the cases in our simulations where, for example, the CDU, CSU, and the AfD would have a majority in parliament. And the citizen forecast is actually a forecast of the coalitions that will actually form and not just whether they will have a majority.
Yeah, so we really asked people, what do you think, which parties will be part of the coalition? So we had all those difficult tasks, and now they even had to implement a coalition model in their head. Which parties are there? Which parties will have a majority and form a coalition? And you can see that the most named coalition was CDU, CSU, and SPD, and that's actually the coalition we have. So that worked quite well. And then lastly, for that, we only have a citizen forecast. We also asked the people, who do you think will be the chancellor? And that's the next slide. And there you can see that they were quite certain that Friedrich Merz was the chancellor. They were right in the end.
Yeah, so to conclude, in general, we had very reliable predictions for both the Zweitstimme and the Erststimme model. The citizen forecasts were also very reliable, even more accurate in some or most cases. The BSW as a new party made it more difficult, but the Erststimme and Zweitstimme model were able to still make predictions. Yeah, we also made predictions for other events like thresholds. And one thing that I think I didn't talk that much about is the uncertainty prediction. So especially for the Zweitstimme model, this is also one of the major advantage over just aggregating the polls, is actually that we benchmark these polls against the final election results to be able to say for each prediction how uncertain this prediction is, looking towards the final election results and not just the present moment of the polls. So in the future, we're thinking of combining the citizen forecasting and other models and stacking different forecasts. That's something that Lukas Stötze and me are working on in Witten. Then also for the Erststimme model, we're planning to use more detailed candidate data. So especially looking into the popularity of candidates that we talked about, how we can capture that, enhance local trend detection. So these are the forecasts, but the project is actually bigger, like Hannah already said in the beginning. At the Hertie School in Berlin, they're working on experiments on the perception of polls. We also provided forecasts for state elections last year that have their own unique challenges. So, for example, in each state, you kind of have different party systems. You might have different, some parties that only run in this state, but not in another. And generally, the challenge of, whether we can learn from between states. So, what happens in one state? What does it tell us about another state? And then generally for the future, what we're looking at is coalition forecasts. So not just stopping at the election result, but actually making forecasts about the probability of which quantitative forecasts about the probabilities of certain coalitions forming based on things like ideological distance. And then one thing that we wanted to do actually already for this election, but given the short amount of time, we weren't able to do our multi-level regressions with post-stratification. This is something where I think we can increase the accuracy in the district forecasts.
Yeah, and then for the citizen forecast, for now, I just weight everyone equally, but there's also some research. Maybe that some people are better than others, so you could weight them more. So we'll definitely be looking into that, and also a little bit away from the forecast, but like just looking at individuals to have more accurate expectations. That's part of my dissertation, so something will come out there sooner or later. And then what we don't have on the slide here, but as I mentioned before, we also surveyed elites, so local candidates and local, or not local candidates, district candidates and local journalists. And we want to see others actually better. Do they have more expertise, or are they actually quite biased because they prefer their party, especially for the candidates, to win? We will look into that data in more detail. And then, as Cornelius mentioned, there's a lot of experimental evidence we need to look for, especially the people at Curtis School need to look into, because we had experiments where we had different polls where people could decide what the sample size is, and then they could see what changes. So it had an educational component, and then we also showed the different forecasts, which ones they prefer. It's about visualizations, but also trusted polls and forecasts. And then in another experiment, we actually showed them our forecasts and what to see, what does that do to their voting behavior or intended voting behavior and their vote expectations. And that's one part. And another part to kind of, we forecast this one election, but it should work for the next election. So we're currently working on an automated pipeline or a database for polling data and fundamentals, so that in the end we can actually have automated forecasts for the next federal elections and also state elections. That works out. You should find that as much before. That we are at the end. So a ride through our last year, I would say, and we left a lot of space and time for Q&A. So if you have any questions on our model and how to forecast elections, please.
I have two questions, but I think they're not that big. One of them, and I think you touched on that a little bit on bias, like did you collect data on who the people were thinking of voting, just to make sure that they're not saying that they think that their candidate, their preferred candidate will win? So like, how do you make sure that this is not just like a poll with extra questions? And then the other question that would really interest me is like, do you have any collection of why the citizens think that that party will win?
And here's more of my direction. So our sample is completely biased. Like they prefer the Greens, they prefer the AfD, CDU, CSU, SPD, not that much. And it's not a probability-based sample, it's really an online access panel. And we have ads on Instagram and Facebook. So really self-selection into the sample. But we can see that it was still rather good. And I'll look more into the individual data, like who were the good people or the better people, who were the worst people, and how much wishful thinking was in there. That's still in progress, but I think it's still kind of cool to see that even though the sample was biased, it worked well. And that's also the selling point of citizen forecasting, because it's so hard to get a probability-based sample, for example, on the district level. If you can actually survey there was a paper for the 2021 election, 20 people, and you can actually make a forecast out of that, even though it's not representative. That's quite cool. And now to your second question. No, we don't have any questions about or open answer fields. Why did you choose that? So it was really about just getting all the data, which is already quite a lot and quite complicated. For example, when it just asks you what are the vote shares from the last election, maybe you wouldn't even know. And now you have to forecast the next election. So our survey was already quite long, unfortunately, but would be interesting.
there's one question on Zoom. So have you thought about incorporating economic data into the forecasting models? Yeah, you might have been the reviewer on our state elections forecasting.
Maybe your name is Michael Respect.
Is Mike there?
No.
So yes, I think that's something we thought about. That's also something for the state forecasts. We actually tried again for the reviewer. It's not predictive of the result. We don't think that that means that economic data, economic variables don't have an effect, but like it might be, or it's most likely because we have poles in the model. So whatever economic drivers are there, they're probably already captured by the poles. So that's why we don't have economic variables in the models.
But generally, they are economic forecasts as well. So because of this.
Yeah, quick follow-up question on wishful thinking in the citizen forecast. I'm sure we discussed this at some point, but as part of the survey, did you implement any encouragements such that respondents wouldn't give their preferred election outcome, but what they actually considered a realistic outcome?
Yes, so we had monetary incentives implemented. So we had one control group, roughly a third. They didn't get any information, but in the other groups, just before asking what are the expected vote shares, we said that the best people, like the best 100 people, would get 5 euros each. Or in another setting, we said the best 3 people would get 500 euros overall. We only did that for the online exit panel, not for the social media, because that's more complicated. But we actually, like, when I looked at the individual data, the mean absolute error was lower, but there's people who got an incentive, or had a chance of getting an incentive. But for example, being more educated had a way bigger effect. So it's really, the effect was minus 0.2 or something. So it didn't matter, but the question is, was it worth the money or not? And we might find out in my dissertation.
Also, question, I was actually very intrigued by your findings that that the citizens forecast work so well. And I'm curious to see your dissertation, or like what you going to analyze, but what are your hypothesis with regards to which groups are better? Also, like, for example, I'm thinking, is it people who are much more informed, who read news, probably we collected these kind of data also, or other variables that you think might?
Yeah, so we collected some data. I'm not sure whether we entered news consumption, but also like talk to friends, colleagues about politics and things like that. So, we have a bunch of social demographics like age, education, gender. For example, in our sample, women thought way worse than men. Then also we have
Was it for age, for example? Is it like
the older the better? That also kind of matches, I think. But one paper of my dissertation will also be a meta-analysis where I look at different papers from different countries, because I think there's a paper from Mexico where it actually didn't work out that well, because the older people are not that educated with this kind of voting system. So it's more the younger people who are better, but in general, the trend is the older the better. So we have those social demographics. Then we have more political attitudes. So are you interested in politics? Which party will you vote for? Things like that. Then also political sophistication. Do we actually know what Zweitstimme are? Which one is decisive? Things like that. And then we also have more contextual data. So when were you surveyed? If you were surveyed 2 days before the election, maybe you were better than 30 days before the election. And then also the margin of victory in your district, maybe the district was clear, maybe it was a more competitive district. So all these things will play a role, and I can give you an answer soon, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. I have 2 quick questions. One, simply because I don't know why 83% confidence intervals. That's not, that was out of interest. And the second, I was wondering whether specifically for your website, whether you have any data on how long, you said you showed how many people were there, but you also have data on how long they actually spent there and whether they clicked around in any way. think that would be really, really interesting to see how certain people engage with the specific map. Specifically, if it's a map, kind of click around. Would be interesting to see, maybe think about if you have data on that, or if not, if you're thinking about doing something like that. For example, it could be like mouse movement tracking or stuff like that.
I think I would like to delegate both questions, actually one question to.
So I think there's 30, 80, whatever the second was. So, anyways, so the idea is to think about, how would you communicate uncertainty to lay people? Think about a 95% confidence interval. Random people on the street, they haven't taken any stats classes. So how should they understand this? So we thought about, okay, we need to have some events that are connected to probability that might actually help them. And one idea was to think about rolling the dice, right? So everyone can understand, that rolling a dice and getting a 6 is likely, but not all too likely. Right? So we thought about using this idea and, construct with this idea confidence. So we have a 5-6 confidence interval, meaning, there's a likelihood of 1/6 that, the true value will not be in the confidence interval. So this is likely, but not all too likely. This is the idea of how to communicate this uncertainty there is in this forecast to label.
Communicate that we even had like a throwing the dice simulator on the website, which
Oh, yeah.
was, I think, a good intention, but I think it also led some people to think that kind of our forecasts are.
And rolling that.
There was one video ago. With the headline, something like forecasts are like rolling a dice. Look at Zweitstimme.org or something like that.
The other question is, I think, something that would be interesting for the people, colleagues at Hertie School. That's exactly, I think, what they're interested in, how people engage with forecasts. We didn't track anything, so the visitors are estimates on server logs. On the IP addresses was also an estimate of unique visitors. We didn't use any cookies or tracking. It opens up a new door to data protection, which could be justified if there's an interesting question.
And also adding to that, we had this idea of having a journalist president, and then we didn't have funding for that, but also it was all. Like we were planning on having an election in September, and suddenly the election was in February. We saw that by November, so all the communication, like the website, Cornelius worked a lot on that because we are researchers, we're not professionals in communication, so it was really, we did not expect that many people on our webpage going viral on Instagram.
A cool relative.
Nicole had a question.
Yeah, I think it was really cool. I have two questions, I guess. One is, so in the British context, we're all scarred by multiple elections where our election forecasts have been really bad and also parties have made very consequential decisions on the basis of them. And I kind of wondered, like, what's your perspective on, because Germany is blessed with polling that works, right? So what's your perspective on how you will deal with it if for some reason polling doesn't work so well in 4 or 5 years' time? Like, how robust do you think this is going to be? How can you investigate this beforehand? Like, what's your perspective on it? And then I have a kind of more like, also quite a parochial British question, but like there's a huge market in the UK for by-election polls. So a member of parliament dies or has to resign in disgrace, and then we have an election in this one district. You're telling me that if I ask 20 people that I don't even have to select them randomly, this will give me an accurate forecast. So if I wanted to do this, how many people would I need? Where would what would I need to know about them? What kind of coverage would you need? And do you think that the citizens' forecasts work so well because they're in the context of a nationwide election with election information, rich environment, and polling discussion? Like, does it perform in other contexts as well?
Polling data Yeah, our model really depends on polling data because aggregating the polls with fundamentals in there, but in the end, the polls really count a lot.
I think one part that would help there are the MRP models that we're working on. So we're basically ourselves, based on survey data that we collected, asking them, who are you going to vote for? Doing that ourselves, because it's true, yeah, the polls are very accurate and we don't really know exactly what the pollsters are doing. So that's my best answer.
And then for the citizen forecast, the question is how much do they rely on the polls? But for example, for the district races, there are no polls, and that actually worked quite well. But maybe they also had some kind of model in their hands, so the national trends knew who was running last time, who won. So it's really, yeah, I still need to get more into the cognitive process that's happening there. But I think, yeah, polls were very accurate, and that also helped us. And then with the by-election, that's a super interesting question. So there's research that's starting from 20 people, maybe even more, but there's also a lot of research on the UK, not by-elections, but Andreas Moore did a lot on the UK. That's super interesting. And yes, you don't need a random sample, but a diverse sample, which is, yeah, harder to grasp. Like maybe if we ask all those people here in the room, there could be a bias because there's research showing that actually experts aren't the best because they are often biased in the same direction. But if you just have like a random or randomly realistic, maybe that could work. So you could give it a try and let me know if it works. That would be really interesting. Then you had a third question.
I was just, is the context of being a national election what's important for the citizen forecast as well? Like, would they perform as well?
We actually tried it out during the Saxon state election, and it worked surprisingly well, which is also very cool because, like, for the national elections, you have so many polls. If you look at Wahlrecht.de, who do a great job as publishing all the polls out there. I just checked it for Saxony again. There was an election in September. No new polls since then. So really, there's not that much information. So citizen forecasting worked quite well there. But actually, we also had quite some problems to get enough respondents in Saxony. Like, I think we wanted to have 900 people in a week, super complicated. And then for the federal election, but like 6,000 people within a day. So it was really harder to get people there to answer the questions, but it did work.
Thank you so much. That was super cool. I'm just curious. So you showed this graph where you benchmark your results to other forecasts, which I really like to YouGov and some other websites. That's the first time. But I was wondering if you have maybe similar sort of graph we can produce one in terms of how accurate the estimates are. So just compare not just the point estimates, but also the uncertainty around them that's produced by different models. But I think what is even more interesting, like for practical reasons, is to see comparison in terms of costs, you know, like, because I could see, for instance, that you're like for a citizen forecasters, you had to survey something like 50,000 people or something like that, right? But for YouGov, I can imagine that, for instance, with the MRP, you can leverage like a very small server of 1,000 participants and that can accurate representation of it. So I'm wondering actually if you know this already, or you can maybe generate something like this just to see that, you know, actually how you can place this in terms of what is required and how certain grounded this things. But the other thing I was wondering, that's the second question I believe, is to think more about where the actually models are performing especially like exceptionally well and exceptionally bad at this kind of scale. If you have some insight maybe from district level data about what's going on in that district, for instance, where the model is not accurate or where the, you know, like intervals are very wide. Is it because you have like data availability issue with this, or is it some like quality of the environment itself? And I feel like if there is, you know, something, for instance, that, for instance, your model is not put in districts that are not media saturated, or where there's like very limited voter information, stuff like this, that's actually cool. I mean, it's very consistent with the environment that you try to predict. But if it's more like technical stuff, like with the data availability, is there something that can be done maybe to increase the precision? So I'm just sort of curious about these things.
Maybe I start with the cost point. So yes, we did have 50,000 people and maybe 2 years per respondent, so it was not cheap. But Friedrichshafen, we would not have needed that many people. So there's a recent paper in the Journal of Forecasting that did it for the 2021 election, and they just really surveyed 20 people per district, had a very short questionnaire, so it can be done way cheaper. We had so many experiments running, so we needed some power. But yeah, it could, like, maybe I will also take a random sample from our sample and see what 20 people would have done, something like that. And that's uncertainties, or giving something like that.
We did some more evaluations and we also published on the blog website already, where we look a little bit more into which constituencies we didn't forecast correctly. But I think it's since that's only about 30, it's not that straightforward to say, this we can see this trend is. So I think one trend is things like popular candidates. Explaining why there's this sudden shift in this. Otherwise, I think the case numbers for really detecting patterns is, especially then we would be looking into the past elections also. And that would be, then we would need to have data on these patterns also in these past elections.
So it's probably not data availability, because this is fairly homogeneous across the district.
And with those citizen forecasts, I still want to look more into the districts, just like, how do you do that? We have 299 districts. But for example, the margin of victory will definitely be something I want to look into. Then also, was there a switch from the last election? Something else, yeah, I mean, the number of respondents varies between 90 to 400, so especially in the urban areas, we have more people. I will look into that as well.
Looking to cover sample close districts.
We do have a lot of data, many things. There's another question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I have a quick follow-up on this slide here. So this is the latest prediction before the actual elections, right? How did this develop over time? Like, how early on were you already similarly accurate? And then my other question would be about where do your two models differ, in which districts? And then maybe related to how could you maybe combine the predictions of the two models, and maybe if the ensemble then is better overall would be cool.
I don't have it at the top of my head how the district models exactly developed over time. I know that the districts that were won by the left party, we didn't see them for the left party until I think like 2 weeks before. I think it's also a fair point because I think this is something like 2 days before, whereas I think YouGov would be at least a week out because they did the survey. So the comparison is a bit difficult.
For the citizen forecast, we can track it over time, just so much aggregation. Yeah.
What is the correct outcome, 2 weeks before the election? How would you evaluate this? I don't know. I don't know.
And then which model performed better? It's also something we still want to evaluate. Like nitpicking, for example, Erfort worked out for the citizen forecast, but we still have to look more closely into the different forecasts where they match, where they don't match.
Another question, and I'm exposing my lack of knowledge about Germany and German elections, but I heard that there's like a website where people can like check who to vote for, or is this not Germany and I'm confusing my news sources? It is Germany.
Yes, we have a VIA called Balomat.
Okay. I don't know if there's like, if you have access to those data, or like, so there would be some crossing opportunities, like crossing those data, trying to figure also like, well, how undecided voters, like what is the likelihood of their behavior, etc. But you don't have access to that data, so the idea just stays in the air.
Yeah, we have, there's the Ballermann, which I think like a hard position, I think there's a lot of research on that, we don't have the data. But we have this idea, there's a website called Watch.de, and they actually collect party petitions for individual candidates. And they like offered us or gave us their items, which you could have added to our survey, and we had like all those cool ideas, but our survey was just too long and we couldn't do it. But would have been cool to see how well, or how, yeah, to compare our samples to.
This slide where you showed the like the district facts that you use for the Erststimme model. And for example, yeah, that one. It also says gender indicator, and I would also say that for a few of the other candidate level factors, that it is disputed in which direction the effect goes. So how did you decide on those factors and in which direction they go? And do you now plan to like change them again and see whether you could even improve your results?
So when I said like someone will carry a bonus, I mean, this is actually the result of a model that's been trained on past data. So we're like agnostic about the direction of the effect. This is something that's based on past elections. We see that there's and I think we actually see a bonus for gender.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally we include factors that are broadly considered influential, but we also don't exclude them when they're not significant or.
So this is not based on previous literature, but just based on previous elections.
So the inclusion of the candidate level factors, like that's based on previous literature, but the model specifics then is based on data from past elections.
So it's an out of sample forecast, right? Because it was trained on previous data, and then you get the new independent variables in and you predict the new determinant.
Once again, Cornelius, for the great talk and the great discussion.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for having us.
Detlef will be back next week already. We'll talk about Gira Sen from University of Mannheim. We'll talk about shuffled and permutated personas. How reliable are large language models at aggregated? Thank you for joining today and have a great day.